Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a geopolitical relationship that essentially shapes the modern Middle East, influences global oil prices, and impacts worldwide security. We are talking, of course, about the relationship between the United States and Iran.
Now, it's kind of wild to think about today, but what if I told you that over 70 years ago, these two nations were actually really close, reliable partners? It's true. Long before the headlines we see today, America and Iran enjoyed strong diplomatic relations, heavy economic investment, and serious military cooperation. So we have to ask, how exactly did two close allies become such bitter rivals?
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at allies with hidden tensions. Then, 1953, oil and interference. After that, 1979, the civilian uprising. Then we'll cover the hostage crisis, and finally wrap up with the modern geopolitical chessboard.
All right, let's jump right into part one, allies with hidden tensions and the Cold War partnership.
So back in the early 20th century, Iran was a monarchy led by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. But right from the jump, there was this profound disconnect between how the US viewed Iran and how Iranians viewed themselves. During the Cold War, Washington basically looked at the map and saw Iran as this crucial strategic chessboard piece to stop Soviet influence. For the US, it was all about global containment. But everyday Iranians, they weren't really thinking about the Cold War. They were growing deeply frustrated by the fact that foreign powers had massive influence over their own country. The superpower saw a strategic partner, the civilians just saw foreign control.
Let's move to 1953, oil and interference. This is the spark that literally changed everything. For years, foreign companies controlled a huge chunk of Iran's oil wealth, and the everyday civilian was seeing almost nothing of those massive profits. Enter Mohammad Mossadegh, Iran's democratically elected prime minister. In a move that was, as you can imagine, wildly popular with the local population, Mossadegh nationalized the country's oil industry. His goal was entirely straightforward. Take the wealth back from foreign companies and use those resources to actually benefit the Iranian people. And this is where the wires cross completely, creating a tragic turning point. The US and Britain looked at this nationalization and completely panicked. They viewed it strictly as a strategic Cold War threat and were terrified of losing critical energy resources. But the local civilians? They saw this exact same event as a monumental democratic victory. They were finally taking control of their own national destiny.
The result of this clash in perspectives was incredibly decisive. The United States and Britain backed a covert operation that successfully removed Prime Minister Mossadegh from power, and in his place, they firmly reinstalled and strengthened the rule of the Shah.
Now, Washington celebrated this as a clean, strategic win for Cold War containment, but the reality on the ground was a totally different story. The deep distrust planted in 1953 didn't just vanish, it simmered. For 26 years, Iranian civilians lived with the very real memory of foreign powers interfering in their democracy just to protect foreign interests. That 1953 spark slowly burned straight through the 60s and 70s, setting the stage for a massive confrontation.
Which brings us to 1979, the civilian uprising. These are the deferred consequences finally boiling over. To really understand why the revolution happened, we have to look through the eyes of the local civilians. By the late 1970s, everyday Iranians had reached a breaking point. The grievances were severe. We're talking heavy government corruption, extreme economic inequality, harsh political repression, and that constant, heavy presence of foreign influence. The local population felt completely alienated in their own country.
So this immense pressure cooker caused the old order to just collapse entirely. Mass protests spread from city to city, driven by the sheer weight of civilian frustration. It became so overwhelming that in 1979, the Shah was actually forced to flee Iran. Soon after, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile, leading the charge to completely transform the nation. Just like that, America's closest Middle Eastern ally was abruptly replaced by an Islamic republic, a brand new government that explicitly and forcefully rejected all U.S. influence.
Next up is the hostage crisis, breaking the bond.
In late 1979, all that simmering anti-American sentiment completely boiled over. Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage. For the United States, this was a daily, visceral trauma. Americans were watching the situation unfold on television every single night. It literally brought the consequences of decades of foreign policy directly into their living rooms.
The crisis lasted for 444 days, over a year of daily standoffs, and that specific metric is exactly how long it took to entirely destroy whatever tiny fragments of trust remained between the two nations. Diplomatic ties were formally severed, and a brand new era of open hostility officially began.
And finally, we arrive at the modern geopolitical chessboard. Decades of tension.
If we look at the dynamic today, both sides have incredibly entrenched positions based on all these decades of friction. American leaders express major concerns over Iran supporting armed groups across the Middle East, along with deep fears regarding Iran's nuclear program and its potential for weaponization. On the flip side, Iranian leaders insist their nuclear activities are purely peaceful, and they accuse the United States of constant interference in regional affairs and imposing crippling economic sanctions. It's this endless cycle of negotiations, diplomatic disputes, and military posturing that keeps both nations dangerously close to direct conflict.
So today's rivalry isn't just a simple disagreement over one issue, it is highly complex. Think of it like a massively complicated puzzle. You have the battle for regional power in places like Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. You have the undeniable gravity of global energy resources. You have legitimate security concerns from both sides, but perhaps the biggest, most foundational piece of it all is those 70 years of unresolved historical mistrust. The heavy legacy of 1953 and 1979 is baked right into every single modern negotiation.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We've seen how a relationship can totally shift from a strategic alliance to deep-rooted rivalry when the top-down goals of a superpower collide with the bottom-up, democratic desires of everyday civilians. The history is written, but the future of the Middle East remains incredibly uncertain. So, what do you think? Can America and Iran ever navigate past these deep historical grievances to rebuild trust? Or is this a shattered alliance that can literally never be repaired? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the headlines.